This is a great day. I wasn't sure we were going to get here. And I'm sure some of you had the same fears. So let me tell you a story. In the 1980s, the U.S. Navy had a ship patrolling in the Persian Gulf named the USS Stark. And it got hit by a big, bad Exocet missile, and it should have sunk. It should have sunk. And the damage control officer, after they investigated what happened, they decided that the one person who saved the USS Stark was the damage control officer, and they gave him a Navy Cross. And that's a really big deal. Because when you get a Navy Cross, part of your retirement is tax-free. And the Navy figures that when you get a Navy Cross, it's because maybe you should have died. It's a big deal. And so you have the Stark, and there's that other ship I found myself thinking a lot about, the Titanic. Titanic didn't make it, did it? Over 1,000 people died. So what's the fundamental difference between the Stark that should have sunk and Titanic? Everybody on the Stark knew something really important. They were part of the crew. They were part of the crew. And in the movie, you probably saw that fellow in the top hat sitting in the bar on Titanic wondering, why can't I get a drink? Remember that? Why can't I get a drink? Why isn't there somebody to wait on me? Everybody on the Stark was working like mad to save the ship. On Titanic, you had people who didn't get it. That it was no longer a cruise ship. It was no longer the most luxurious cruise liner in the world. It was the ship in danger of dying. All right, so here at Trinity Church, we have to decide, what are we? Are we part of the crew, or is this a cruise? And I think it has everything to do with the way we respond to what the world demands, to what past Christianity demands of us. See, the fact of the matter is, we're always colliding with something. 4.5 years ago, Trinity Church collided with that thing called Katrina. And it had a profound effect on us, didn't it? 3,500 years ago, a group of Israelites had a collision with the living God. And it changed everything. That Moses guy was out in the desert talking to a burning bush that kept burning and kept burning. And it called him to a task that he had to do. He had to do it. He realized he was part of the crew. But over and over and over again, we see people having a collision of one sort or another. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had a collision with the rules. And they failed. But God didn't give up. Moses had this collision with the burning bush. And he kept going. And God never gave up. Saul had a collision with insanity, but God never gave up. David plotted against an innocent man named Uriah so he could steal his wife, but God never gave up. Ahaz sold out to a foreign nation, but God never gave up. John the Baptist was beheaded, but God never gave up. Peter denied he even knew Jesus, but God never gave up. The disciples all ran away, except for Mary, his mother, and John, the beloved disciple. But God never gave up. The hero of the Bible is God. And God never gives up. So why should we give up on him? Why should we give up on this mission he's laid out before us? And look at what we've done. Look at this. We did this together, didn't we? I was talking to Matt, a contractor, the other day, and he said he had to have this terrible conversation with this pastor he met somewhere else on the coast. This pastor was convinced that the money was going to continue to roll in, everything was, he was going to be able to do everything he felt called to do, so he started 3 buildings. Now he's out of money, and he's only halfway done with all of them. He can't use any of them. So somehow we've been able to cling together and get it done. And this is a glorious building. This is a glorious building. And God has blessed us with it. And I've been praying for this since September 1st of 2005 when I came back, and I said a prayer in what was left of this building. And it's been a long time, hasn't it? This took longer than my college career. I was wondering, why does this feel like it's taken so long? Because it did. Because it did. Now look, these lessons that we have today are really important. These are really important. St. Paul, in talking to the people of Corinth, is focusing on something that we have to remember, that we're always being tempted. And temptation is not new to us. Just because they didn't have television in Corinth, they were equally tempted as we are. They just weren't quite as public about it as we are, since television can go everywhere. But we all have to remember that we can be pulled away from our mission. We can be distracted by things that aren't quite as important. But something important has happened to Trinity Church. Something that we really have to remember. And yes, it's wonderful to come back home. And there's no place like home. I mean, Dorothy was right, wasn't she? But when Dorothy gets back from Oz, she's not quite the same, because she's seen Oz. She's not quite the little girl she was when she left. And Trinity Church isn't quite the same as it was 4.5 years ago. Now, the lesson that I think we really have to pay attention to is this gospel reading. And this can be a little bit difficult to understand, where Jesus is talking about, just because the tower fell on that group of 18 people, they weren't any worse sinners than you or I are. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're not worse sinners than the people in Northfield, Minnesota, where my brother lives, just because Katrina hit us. That's what happened to us. In Northfield, they get blizzards. Here we get hurricanes. But what's important here is what Jesus is telling you. All Christians, all of God's people are called to pay attention to this parable about the fig tree. The owner of the vineyard comes into his vineyard, and he says, well, what's this? I planted this fig tree 3 years ago. And remember, in Israel, they did not have a lot of good soil. They were not blessed with lots of rich soil, so they were really careful with it. And a vineyard owner would dedicate a square foot or two to raising a fig tree or a grapevine. And it had to be the best soil in the garden. It had to be the deepest, and it took the most water. And then the real kicker in this is when you plant a fig tree, you don't get any fruit for 3 years. 3 years. And now the owner has come back and says, well, I've given you your due. I've given you your 3 years. Where's the fruit? And the guy tending the garden says, we'll give you 1 more year, and I'll work on it a little more, and we'll see. But at the end of the next year, if there's no fruit, out it goes. And what Jesus is saying to us, and to all Christians, to all of his people in all time, is you're expected to bear good fruit. This is a statement to us. And so we need to think, what needs to come out of Trinity Church? God has given us back our building. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? Are we going to look at this as Titanic or the USS Star? Do we have a mission? And are we the crew together to accomplish this mission? Because I really feel called. I got blown out of my cube by Katrina and into the street. And I think part of my job is to help rebuild this town, rebuild this community. And we can have a powerful impact on these schools across the street. Mr. Nelson is talking to Father Jeremy all the time about a mentoring program so we can help the kids. I'm involved in meetings all the time with the Boys and Girls Club at the back of the school property. And that's the biggest club on the coast, because there are so many kids in past Christianity who need us. And there are all sorts of other needs in this community as well. And so what are we here for? Why are we here? Because the owner of the vineyard is looking to see what fruit comes on the boats. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.